Hello and welcome to another Dove Dive, where I'm put on to the musics and melodies from the deepest, darkest dungeons of your computer disk. I'm your host, Joe Dove, and this week I'm put on to Suite for Flute and Jazz Piano from my aunt, Yvette. Hey, welcome back to the Dove Dive. This week we're super excited to be put on, and when I say we, I mean us, as in the audience and myself, are super glad to be put on to music by French composer Claude Bolling and Jean-Pierre Rampal. This particular album is called Suite for Flute and Jazz Piano, and it was pretty dope. I gotta say, like right off the bat, I was not expecting because of the word jazz, I was expecting more of a chaotic foray, but I was pleasantly surprised. And I just absolutely love this album. So once again, my aunt has put me onto music that's now going to be a continuous play in my playlist. So thanks again. So I'm going to get into the artists, about the artists, so to speak. Claude Bolling was a French pianist and composer that dedicated part of his work to create a crossover music blending classical and jazz languages. This album was his brainchild, and it was his most known work, breaking records all along the Billboard charts, but I'll get into that later. Jean-Pierre Rampal, playing the lead classical language part on the flute, Rampal became the first exponent of the solo flute in modern times to establish it on the international concert circuit. He is credited to bringing the instrument back to the 20th century ear as a solo performance. This was an accomplishment as it not had been a solo instrument since the 18th century. So good on them. It's amazing. Let's dove dive, shall we? Indeed. Let's dive into this album's highlights. This is the crossover album by the French pianist and composer Claude Bolling with Jean-Pierre Rampal on flute. So I've got to say, right off the bat, this was very different from what I expected, and I was blown away. This far exceeded my expectations. And of course it's going to do that because my aunt put me onto it, and she's amazing with knowing what I like in music. So, Burquois and Blue. I read a lot about the album after experiencing it, and I can understand why it's a favorite, not only to Yvette, but it was not only to Yvette, but it was on the Billboard Top 40 for 10 years. The melody of flute, which enters solo in the beginning, especially on this track, but quickly accompanied by piano in the same tune, was like walking in a flower field. It starts you off in a trance and swiftly transcends into a bass and drum fuller jazz band. It's really the highlight to me on the album. Just so happens to be the first song, but it's sweet and up-paced, something you can use to brighten your day or just help you complete tasks, especially if they are mundane and something that is just mind-numbing. But with this song in the background, it just gives you a moment and a reflection as to how you can get it done, and it motivates you. It's a motivator, and that's what I really like about it. And the whole album kind of stays in this vein. It's very uplifting, fast tempo, and just has ebbs and flows of percussion and flute, which it's just a nice blend, and I really enjoyed it. I can't praise it enough, so to speak. Javanaise, which I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, but it's the perfect wake-up tune. Abrupt piano to place you into the world, then a soft and interchanging. I love it when an artist changes tempos across one song. It's more lively and reflective of how your day goes. We face the sun, its warming hands in the dawn, the heat in midday molds us to shape our projects, and its setting calms us to rest. That's a perfect reflection on this particular song. It's a pick-up pace in mind, especially just the way it reminds me of finishing daily tasks. And as I said earlier in the first song, the entire album kind of gives you that pace in order to get everything done. And it's funny. The reason why I keep saying that is because I was actually wrapping up my last shipments from my previous job while I was listening to this for the Dove Dive episode that you're listening to right now. And the big boss, the company president, came in and said, "Oh, I know this song. It's calming but upbeat to help you get your task done." And I just agreed. It is. And, as I just said, I'm moving on and heading into a new world. So I'm super excited for the possibilities, and I'm going to miss everybody at my previous job. Just a quick shout out to Tony and Nally and Sarah, Rosie, the management, Brian. If you guys are listening to this, Gabe, Solomon, and even Mr. Daba, and my boy Paul. Good luck to all of you, and a big special shout out to Leanne. We never got that true crime podcast going, but we'll always have true crime to chat about on Instagram and other social medias, as that's not going to change. And I'm going to stay cool with all of you. I haven't lost touch with all the people I worked with previously in my prior life, so expect the same. And I'm going to miss seeing you all. It's the business, and we'll probably run into each other. Moving on, the last song we're going to dive into, Volise. It is the last song on the album, but it strikes you. It's like, it's the fast tempo. It's a build up to a final song on the album, and it's a total standout. It really brings out the flute and piano combo with that drum that's ever present but not overtaking as it would be on most jazz albums, which was a very beautiful change for me. And it's a really nice blend between the two genres. It's such a beautiful piece, and there's a part that I've looped while listening to it. It's on the 3309 mark, where everything builds up on piano, drums, and flute, and then comes to an abrupt halt. And just a split second later, you're carried back into the music with a beautiful flute solo. The entire album is a must-hear, and it's so upbeat and grand. It's a perfect balance of the two genres of classical music and jazz that it's probably something you should put on while you drive, especially if you get stuck in traffic on Route 21 like I do, and it drives you crazy because you should just be getting to where you want to go, and this will probably calm your mind as you're doing so. The final piece is an exquisite way to wrap up a music experience. Well, special thanks to Yvette, who, like I said, is my aunt, for this introduction to Suite for Jazz Piano and Flute, and the many years of putting me on to musics and melodies from her collection. She is by far one of the three biggest influences on my musical choices to this day. And this wraps up our Dove Dive. Joining me next time, where James Geiger puts me on to Blue Eyes. James has an amazing story as well as the artist, so I'm going to dive into a little bit of that too. And he's one of the folks that I've met on the new app Hi-Ho. And this is just a plug, they're not sponsoring anything. I just want to get that out of the way. But if you look to sponsor, you are more than likely going to want to visit our future website, disdungeon.com. But in the meantime, you can always hit us up at Disdungeon Podcast. That's right, Disdungeon Podcast at gmail.com. Put us onto something. Follow me on TikTok and Instagram, and put me onto some music. I've got 6 new artists that I'm going to be listening to for the Dove Dive. So James is going to be one of them. Blue Eyes is one of the folks that we had mentioned, and he put me onto, and just a ton of folks put me onto stuff between the Hi-Ho app, TikTok, and Instagram. So lots coming out. Episode 33 is going to come out. It's the sequel to Music Curses, which was episode 32, which we had the special guest and honor to host Josh Sterling from the Haunting Season podcast. And I highly hope that you download that episode and the Haunting Season podcast, especially if you love the old school radio horror stories from the times before television. Josh is an amazing podcaster and storyteller and writer. So let me tell you, I've become such a huge fan of it, and it's often playing on my way to work. I love horror genre. I love horror movies. I grew up on that. My uncle, my mom, my aunt even would play some of those when I was younger, and it's just a fun film experience. And Josh brings you right back into that. It's what's been missing from the genre these years. And I really, really hope that you download and subscribe to his Haunting Season podcast. All right. I'm going to wrap it up with one piece of good news. We have another special guest. Since episode 31, we've been having special guests on the Behind the Beat section of the actual Disc Dungeon podcast with Julie and I. And we've had Jay Escobar, who just dropped his first single called You and I. Amazing. And we are going to have Mark Mallman. So excited. Mark Mallman, you may remember, he was the guy that had the record for playing music almost 24/7, going from New York City to LA in a van, and he made a world record off that. But most recently, you may know him from the show Rick and Morty. He sang and produced the song Flowers. Such a great song. Go download that, come back, and check us out. He's going to be on the show on a future date. Episode 33 is going to have the creator, that's the elder. This guy is so inspirational. He's a pastor from Mount Vernon, my old hometown, and we've always been around in the same circles. We know the same people, but we never met until we recorded this interview on episode 33, Music Blessings. So it's the yin to the yang, the 32 and 33, and there's going to be more information in that. So we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe. And if you have iTunes, I'd really appreciate it if you give us a rating and leave a comment on iTunes. Just a couple of sentences. It's not too much, and it goes a long way.